Welcome back to another episode of Boots on the Ground, where we discuss Israel's politics, war, and identity. We're a few days into the end of hostilities in Gaza, and we have a lot to discuss. But first, we want to thank our partners at Jerusalem Media Group and our sponsors, BeThereIsrael.com, for all your Israel celebrations and commemorations. BeThereIsrael.com provides live streaming of events here in Israel to your families and friends around the world. And now, on with the show. Ari, how are you?
I'm great, Shaun. How are you doing?
I'm good. We said we have a lot to discuss, and obviously the first thing on everyone's mind is the apparent end of the Gaza war. President Trump was here in Jerusalem saying what he said. Are things over, and how do you feel about it?
Wow, that's a big question. Trump said a lot of things. So my feelings on the entire plan in general, Trump's speech and his whole visit here, I'm actually torn. I'm torn very much in half. On the one hand, we saw accomplished what you and I and many people like us have been fighting for the last 2 years. We always hoped and dreamed that one day in Gaza we would find the hostages on our own and bring them home. I had the honor of being involved directly in one and very tangentially involved in other operations that brought home the bodies of other hostages. And that's one of the main things we've been fighting for 2 years. Not the only thing, not even necessarily the most important thing, but it's something we've been fighting for 2 years. And to see it happen that the live hostages are home, some of the deceased hostages have been returned. We have yet to see if the rest of them will be, is a huge weight off our shoulders, off many people who've been fighting. It's off our shoulders. And in theory, it should make the continue fighting, if we have to continue fighting and can achieve the continuation of some sort of a diplomatic process, it should, in theory, make it easier. So on the one hand, there's happiness. On the other hand, the way this entire deal was put together and the stance that Israel took, there was just a massive, I'm not sure surrender is the right word, but capitulation to American supremacy. And it shows a lack of Israel properly taking initiative when it had the chance and using its power and its position in the region to its best. It showed just a continuation of a very weak leadership on Israel's part and this unwillingness to accept our role in the region, but going back to being that secondary, weaker power in the region that, in the end of the day, is controlled by almighty United States of America.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to argue with some of what you say, and I will
That's
probably agree
fine.
with some of it. But let's start with the facts. The facts are we are exactly 2 years after the outbreak of hostilities of October 7th and
Simchat Torah.
Simchat Torah, and the fighting in Gaza has now officially ended, for now.
For now.
And all live hostages are home.
Correct.
Now, we've spoken about this many times, and it's worth repeating. When the war broke out, Netanyahu stood up on camera and said, we have two goals. We're going to bring everyone home, and we're going to defeat Hamas. As of now, most of one of those goals have been achieved. That is not what victory looks like. That is not what winning looks like. It is clearly not what any of us imagined would happen 2 years ago.
Right.
I think most of us, at least, I imagined that definitely it wouldn't take 2 years. I thought maybe a year and a half, but we would see a parade of mostly live hostages coming home. We would bow our heads when there would be many dead bodies returning home. And we would proudly watch as reams of Hamas terrorists, those who hadn't been killed in battles with the IDF or buried under the rubble, those who had left would be marched into prison with their hands and feet shackled. That was the victory I think many of us expected to see. And either that was naive, or we didn't comprehend what would happen, or that was never really the plan of our leaders. But that's not how this ended.
Well,
It ended with the live hostages who were left coming home. An incredible celebration. It really was. It was powerful to see the different families and the friends and everything that many of these people had been battling for years happening. It was incredible. And we have a few bodies coming back. I have a funeral in a few hours from the recording of this podcast where we'll be going to a reburial. But Hamas is still there.
Hamas is very much still there and making its power felt in the streets. Just today, they were they were killing their so-called collaborators with Israel out in the open and not hiding. But I want to strengthen what you were saying. I don't think that necessarily where I am, I wasn't really picturing victory in the detail that you were picturing it, but I pictured victory as either the utter and total surrender or the annihilation of one's enemy. That's the way I think of victory. That's, I think, the official definition of a military victory is that your enemy either surrenders or is annihilated. And in my eyes, we could have achieved that. I wouldn't even say in a year and a half. I could say in 6 months, as someone who was there at the beginning. It could have been achieved if our leadership had the fortitude that the soldiers actually doing the fighting had. At the very beginning, we had all the legitimacy from an international level. We had all the weapons we needed at the very beginning to have an extraordinarily fierce and fast victory. But our own leadership didn't have that fortitude, and they were afraid of that force, of letting that force out of its cage. And we fell into this cycle of never ending, almost winning, and getting close and then slowing down and stopping and holding back. And I can't imagine another people in the world that would hold back in such a situation. There was no reason to hold back. But given the reality that we did hold back, and we never went after the first couple of days, we really took our foot off the gas, and we didn't do that, and our leadership didn't have that fortitude, was afraid, we got into the situation we were in now. And I do think that the deal is the least bad of all the options that were on the table. And it achieved, for the most part, like we said, the most part of one goal of the war. And it's yet to be seen if it achieves the second goal. That we'll find out in the coming days and weeks.
So I'm still very conflicted about where we are now. On the one hand, I'm actually relatively positive. And I'll talk about that later on. But the fighting has stopped. And it really was, it was a positive emotional experience to see the hostages coming home. But like we said before, Hamas is clearly not defeated. And one of the things that often gets to me is when President Trump said, you have 48 hours and this is it, the war is over. And you will be releasing all the hostages within this time period and you will start bringing the bodies back in this. He was very clear about it. This is it. I'm President Trump. I'm laying down the law. This is what's going to happen. Now, until now, we've been told that the IDF is killing tens of thousands of Hamas fighters and their command is falling apart. Their control structure is falling apart. And we really believed this. And I think we were doing incredible work on the ground defeating Hamas. But within 2 days of these end of fighting, the so-called defeated Hamas control and command and control center was able to, within hours, locate all 25 Israeli hostages.
20.
Sorry, all 20 Israeli hostages immediately. They knew exactly where they were and they were preparing them for release. That is not a command structure that is defeated. That is a command structure that is still in communication with various aspects and can still control things. So immediately for me, it was that's where the dichotomy started. Yes, we're bringing the people back. That's incredible. One of the goals is mostly achieved. But if Hamas has the ability to do that, they're not defeated. It doesn't matter how many people we say we killed or how many leaders we proudly say we annihilated. They can still control what's going on. And that means we failed in that objective.
Correct. We're in full agreement on this.
Okay. Where we disagree is, unfortunately, I don't see a alternative at the moment. How were we supposed to win this war? And before you answer that, you mentioned something that we haven't really touched on in our previous episode is international legitimacy. I think that is a misnomer. I think it is something that too much credit is put into. Israel had international legitimacy on the 7th of October when people were being brutalized and burnt to death in the kibbutzim. Israel had international legitimacy on the 8th of October and the 9th of October when we were picking up our own body pieces like we did at the end of the Holocaust. Israel had international legitimacy the first couple of days after the war when our soldiers were primed and ready for action. The minute we turned the tide and we entered Gaza because we were going to defeat our enemy, international legitimacy evaporated. And it didn't matter that we were going to kill tens of thousands of Gazans or we were going to kill one. The minute we go on the offensive and we are no longer dead and dying, we lose international legitimacy. It is not there for our support, it is a hindrance. So I do not think that it was squandered or misused. It was never there in the first place.
So let me sharpen the point I was trying to make. I'm completely in agreement with you, the reality of international legitimacy. I'm the first that says, who cares what the world thinks? You have to still do the right thing. There's international legitimacy. I was saying that at that moment in time, at the very beginning, there was no excuse that anyone in Israeli leadership could use at that point. Because the regular excuse that everyone does, well, if we attack right now, we'll lose international legitimacy. So that excuse, even that excuse, didn't exist anymore. And the reality is with Israel is that when Israel is winning, people will complain, but they don't get in our way. Because in the end of the day, we're winning our battle, but we're fighting a fight that's global. If you think the leadership in England is looking and saying, ooh, Israel's invading Gaza and killing the Muslim extremists in Gaza, and that somehow doesn't affect the position we have here in England with our growing and more radical Muslim population, Israel is showing us what needs to be done, and they're doing it very successfully, and that gives us the confidence to do it here at home in England or France or wherever. So while they might complain publicly and saying, oh, you're killing too many people, you're fighting in the wrong type of way, they're not going to get in our way as long as we're winning. As long as we show confidence and strength and fortitude in our own goals and achieving our own victory, they're not going to help us, but they'll stay out of our way. It's the second that we falter, that we show a lack of confidence, that we show a lack of leadership, that's when the world says, oh, now we're just not going to get in their way. Now we're going to start defending their enemies.
So what should have happened?
So again, we can talk about what could have been, what should have been. Hindsight, as we all know, is 20/20. So we could talk about it for a minute, but it's not really useful. What I think we should have done was we should have used all the plans that we have, the Tuchnot Megira,
the drawer plan, the plans that we held in the drawer in the closet.
The plans that every army has for what if. There is a plan for the lightning conquering of all of Gaza. It requires an enormous amount of manpower, but that enormous amount of manpower was already called up, was already available. And that plan was partially put into action at the beginning of the war, but they never followed through with phase 2, 3, 4, 5 of it. They took their foot off the gas. I do believe that at the beginning, there should have been a massive, overwhelming offensive, tens of times larger than we had, and conquered and invaded all of Gaza at the same time. It would have thrown the entire enemy system into total disarray and shambles because they wouldn't have been able to work piecemeal. It would have been much more difficult, and it probably would have been a little bit bloodier on both sides, but it would have achieved the same goals we're at today, but it would have achieved it a year and a half ago. But we could talk about what should have been and what could have been. For 55 episodes straight, it won't matter. We can't change history. I don't have a time machine. You don't have a time machine. Not going to happen. But we can talk about the reality is that we got into the position we were in a week ago, before this deal happened. Let's go a week back. Let's go 2 weeks back even. We're in a certain position, and we do have to give credit where credit is due. Given the reality that we were in, I do believe that Netanyahu and Dermer, with the fact we're working with a larger, more intense military pressure in Gaza, we're able to achieve the best deal possible at the time.
Yes, I agree with
Exactly.
you. I agree with you.
I think the question,
This is the best. You said it before.
right,
This is the best of the worst situation.
right, and I think that the real test is going to be from now moving forward. I've said it in the past, where I think that the test of success or failure for our current leadership shouldn't be based on what happened up until October 7th, until Simchat Torah 2 years ago. They should be tested on what they've done since then. Or I think with this deal also, let's not look for a minute about how we got into this deal or all the things that could have been or should have done. Let's look at the deal for what it is. But now let's judge its success or our leadership's ability to succeed based on how they behave from Erev Chag, which was 2 days ago when we're recording this. Let's judge them going 3 days forward, 4 days forward, a week forward. Let's look back in 2 weeks and see where we stand. In the end of the day, we're now 48 hours, 72 hours into this deal. Hamas is already not living up to their side of the bargain, and the Israeli army has not re-entered Gaza.
Okay, so
in the end of the day, I'm saying in the end of the day, there's pressure. It's worthwhile to give the negotiators time to make it happen. But in the end of the day, until all 28 bodies of the remaining dead hostages are returned, which I don't think is even possible physically for Hamas to do, because they probably lost some of them or never knew where some of them were to begin with. But until that's achieved, there shouldn't be any discussion moving forward, and there should be an automatic reinvasion. And this time it should be done right. There's no more living hostages to hold us back.
okay, so there's a couple of things. The first thing is I need to acknowledge that I was wrong significantly. I miscalculated the situation with Hamas. I put myself into Hamas's shoes and right here in this room, and I said, there is no motivation for Hamas to ever give back all the bodies. There is no motivation for them ever. Turns out they did. I'm still not 100% sure what their motivation is or how or what President Trump did to convince them, but I was wrong. I said there's no way they could, and they did. Within 48 hours, they said, okay, here's everyone alive, and they gave them over, which was something I never imagined to happen. So I was wrong there, and once again, President Trump, against everyone, was able to pull this off. So that's the first thing.
I was wrong on that same point also.
Okay. And
it happens.
It's good to acknowledge that. The next thing is, I think we need to explain, also for ourselves, but everyone else, there's this 20 or 21 point plan, depending on which day of the week it is, that we're talking about. That the end of hostilities, if you want to call it, as President Trump said, it's a gradual process. The first was both sides acknowledge that they want to end hostilities. And then once Israel signs the deal and everything else, within 48 hours, we have all the living hostages coming back. In return, Israel gives back a specific number. It was nearly 1,700 prisoners, including Gazans, and a number of the worst terrorists, not the top of the list, but some of the worst.
250.
Some of the worst who are responsible for heinous crimes.
Some of whom were released hundreds of meters from my own home.
Right. And then the next stage, which is supposed to happen right now, is the release of bodies, which wasn't supposed to be gradual. It was also supposed to be more or less instantaneous, one step after another. And that is where we are stuck right now.
Right. And in addition, we were supposed to release some of their bodies back to them and allow an enormous amount of humanitarian aid into Gaza.
Right.
So
and
now,
there's another part we're missing, is the entire Gaza was divided into 3 different zones. The IDF pulled back to a intermediate zone, and then with the end of the exchange, they were supposed to pull back to a further zone, and then maintain a presence in along the Gaza perimeter, on the inside of the perimeter. Those are the stages. So now we're stuck at the stage where Hamas isn't handing over our bodies at the pace that it was agreed to.
right. And at the same time, we're not handing over their bodies.
Right.
But we did allow all the humanitarian aid in, with no exceptions.
So that also, I wouldn't say we've allowed it all. After the release of the bodies was delayed, we slowed down the amount of humanitarian aid going in. We didn't allow it. We were supposed to.
This morning, they announced that everything's going in on schedule.
It's being slow. Again, it is on schedule, but it's slower pace than was initially agreed. And what's also interesting from a military point of view is there are a number of Hamas operatives who are testing the IDF's boundaries. And the next test is going to be what's going to happen when unarmed individuals cross the perimeter line separating Israel forces and the rest of Gaza. What's going to happen when IDF spots armed Hamas guys patrolling a certain area? And the other thing, we're seeing this now, Hamas is literally executing people at will. What does that mean for the internal stability of Gaza? And the later parts of the peace plan is when you're going to integrate and bring in international forces and mediation. It's very hard to create a peaceful situation on the ground when everyone Hamas doesn't like is being executed.
Well, I think there begs to be a bigger question. Before all that happens, Hamas is supposed to be disarmed. And the big question is, by whom? The question that I've been asking and haven't got an answer. According to the plan, this will be disarmed by international troops from Turkey and Qatar. Two nations that are not exactly our friends. So now we're bringing armed soldiers of basically enemy states to within our own country to disarm a different enemy of ours that shares the same values and the same beliefs as each other.
And it's being hosted by, and their leadership is already being hosted
by them. Exactly.
In those countries.
So this sounds like a plan that definitely isn't going to blow up in our faces. Because again, we have so many examples of international forces from all over the world that have protected our security and safety on our northern border for decades, and they've done an outstandingly great job at it.
Right. We can totally trust the international forces to do a great job.
So the point I was trying to make originally was, on the one hand, I'm happy that our hostages came home. I'm very concerned moving forward of what that means and the way in which that deal was achieved. In the end of the day, Hamas neither surrendered nor was annihilated, which means we did not achieve victory over Hamas. And as long as they live to fight another day, they get stronger. And we can extrapolate out from that, not only that, Hamas, their street credit of being able to survive the war and still control Gaza, that street credit spills over into Judea and Samaria or to other parts in the world and strengthens their own positions on other fronts that we have now.
So this is where I'm going to respectfully disagree with you.
Okay.
Gaza is it's a wreck. The overwhelming majority of Gaza has been turned into rubble.
I'm aware. I've been there.
Which means it doesn't matter how Hamas tries to spin it. They can spin it as their own personal victory. Yay, we won because we survived. From a Palestinian perspective, there is nobody who could look at Gaza and say, this is a victory. Hamas can say, we won.
That's using your set of priorities, though. That's not their set of priorities.
And so here again, you said, what does this mean for the West Bank? Yes, as somebody who is serving in the West Bank, there is a lot of tension there. We're really worried about what this is going to mean. It's twofold. The first is the Hamas people in the West Bank are trying their best to whip up some type of zeal for their cause to say, look, we withstood 2 years of bombardment in Gaza. We can do this now in the West Bank and we can survive. But most Palestinians are looking at Gaza and saying, that is not a victory we want. A victory when you are clearing out rubble is not, it's great for the leadership. It's great for Hamas. It's great for the people who survive and can run off to Qatar and run off to Turkey and can build a mansion. But for the average Palestinian, that is not a victory.
Today, and in 3 years from now, under the plan when the entire Muslim world is funding the rehabilitation of Gaza and rebuilding everything, and they have all of their material comforts back, because again, you're using your priorities in life as a Western Jew who values life, who values your buildings and your property, whereas for them, they will sacrifice their own children in order to kill more Jews, is more important to them than their property. Once again, and in 2 years from now, after Gaza is rebuilt, with the millions, if not billions of dollars in the world, from Qatar, from Egypt, from the United Arab Emirates, from Saudi Arabia, countries who have endless amounts of money from oil wealth will happily fund the rebuilding of Gaza because those numbers don't even add up to anything of significance for them. Do the Hamas members and the Muslims of the West Bank still look at Hamas as failures, or do they look at them as they successfully killed thousands and injured thousands more Jews? Yes, some of us were killed in the process, but again, they sanctified death, not life. And in the end, we have a beautiful, rebuilt, rehabilitated Gaza Strip out of it. We can have the same thing here in Hebron, Ramallah, Jenin, Shechem, Tulkarem.
No, I don't think so. And
Okay. You're more hopeful than I am then.
no, it's not about hope. I think I'm just being more realistic. As much as we spoke about Qatar and the Arab and Muslim world, and even some of the Western nations funding a rehabilitation and rebuilding in Gaza, it's not going to happen as smoothly, as quickly, and as nicely as people think. It's going to take a very, very, very long time. It's going to be incremental at best. And there is going to be destruction, utter destruction there for a long time to come. And the average Palestinian is not going to look around and say, stand on his pile of rubble and say, this is good. And until their houses or even their basic infrastructure is livable, is going to take a very long time. And in that interim, there are going to be many, many Palestinians in the West Bank who are looking at this and saying, we don't want that. We don't want to, forget about, we said sacrifice their children. We don't want to live in a hellhole so that other people can say we won.
Okay, so again, on this point, we're going to disagree. I'm not going to convince you. You're not going to convince me. And the beauty is that we're recording this and publishing it. And in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, 10 years, one of us will have to apologize to the other one. And I very much hope that I am completely wrong on this and you are right. That's my hope.
I also do, but I look forward to sharing a beer or a good whiskey when we can discuss who was right and who was wrong, or a combination of their own. But we're getting to the end of this episode, and I'm sure we're going to have many more discussions about this. So I wanted to leave with a thought that I had just a few hours ago. We were finishing Simchat Torah, and I was dancing with my children and my community. And I had to think back to exactly where I was last year and to where I was 2 years ago. And I was jarred into a really incredible sense of, I was jarred into a really important sense of thanksgiving to God and to our community. And also, I had an overwhelmingly positive feeling, and I'll explain it to you like this. October 7th, 2023, the afternoon of Simchat Torah was a low point for me, for Am Yisrael, for everyone. The images that were coming in, the horrors, the death, the destruction was terrible. I had left my family in a bomb shelter, shaking with fear, thrown on my uniform, and I was ready to do battle with the most horrible thoughts in my mind, not knowing when the next time I would see civilization or happiness until a job that needed to be done. And for all we knew, this was the end. We had Hamas, who was invading southern Israel, butchering and murdering at will. We had Hezbollah on the northern border who were ready to invade the Galilee. We had the Houthis in Yemen who, because they could, were firing drones and missiles at us. We had Iran who was laughing at President Biden and preparing to ramp up their nuclear arsenal. That was October 7th, 2 years ago. Simchat Torah last year, and more, we were on the eve of the invasion of the North, and even the best case scenarios were thousands of casualties, hundreds of thousands of missiles raining down on Israel. And we still thought that Hezbollah had the ability to invade the Galilee. We were at the end of a second or second and a half ceasefire in Gaza. Some people had come back. We had just received 6 more dead hostages. And me personally was the day after Simchat Torah last year, in this exact position last year, I was drafted for my second extended round of Miluim. And as I was putting on my uniform, I got a phone call that a very good friend of mine had been killed in the battles in Lebanon. And we were prepared for another disaster. And this was before President Trump was elected. So was Biden going to go in for a second period? Was Kamala Harris going to win the White House? What did that mean for Iran and everything else? And we were not in a good way. And I remember that Simchat Torah, there were still hostages. There was all this uneasy. It wasn't a simcha. It wasn't a happy Simchat Torah. Yesterday was the exact opposite. It wasn't perfect. We didn't have the victory that I'd imagined but everyone was coming home. I remember we were dancing, we were laughing, we were drinking a lot. There was no more threat from Hezbollah in the north. Nasrallah is a memory. Syria is gone as a threat to Israel. Our hostages are back. Iran has no nuclear ability to threaten us. We have decimated them. Even the Houthis right now have lost most of the leadership. They're not sure. President Trump was here on Erev Chag embracing Netanyahu. And with all that, I was with my children, my wife, my family, and my friends, and we were dancing. We were celebrating Simchat Torah as it should be. So it's not perfect, but this overwhelming sense of positivity and it's going to be okay and it's good has been there.
Wow. So I had a very similar experience. I'm not going to go back into the whole past 2 years, but in Simchat Torah in our shul, we give like a theme for each one of the 7 hakafot, the 7 times you circle the room of the Sefer Torah. We give a theme to each one. Obviously, everything's around the war and hostages and blah, blah. So one, I believe it was the number 2 or number 3, was in honor of the reservists in our families. And I had many conversations with people in shul already long before that, and I was like, on the one hand, I'm very happy. On the other hand, I'm still very, like I expressed in this episode, I'm very fearful for our future. And it's very hard to be just completely let it go happy when you still have this fear and understanding that it's only partial. And they looked around the room, they asked me to lead the hakafa that we did in honor of the reservists and their family. And I'm like, why me? Why not him? I like pointing around the room, like, everyone here like does reserve. Why pick me? And they're like, no, Ari, you go, you do it. You're the loudest of all of us anyways. We'll hear you everywhere. And I said, fine, no problem. And it was that moment that I held the Sefer Torah in my hand and I started with the first, I don't remember what the beginning was, but you get the Hoshiana, that Hashem's our savior in the end of the day. And he's going to save us and he's going to protect us. And it was that first when our shul, the acoustics are really bad. So you have to like basically scream if you want anyone to hear you. And I let out that Hoshiana, and to hear everyone respond exactly what you're saying, and it brought me that sense of nothing, like you're saying, nothing's perfect, but it will be. Nothing's 100% happy. There's never 100% happiness in the world. Even on the happiest days of our lives at our weddings, we remember the destruction of the temple. There's always, in Judaism, you're never 100% happy because there's always something missing in the end of the day. And when we reach that perfection, that means that, the redemption's happened, Mashiach, the Messiah, is here, and we can all chill out for a bit. And as much as I hope that happens tomorrow, I don't think it really is just yet. But there is this level of, I could take a deep breath, I'll enjoy the happiness for today and tomorrow, and then we'll get back into figuring out how to make sure that our future stays as bright as it has been.
On that happy note, looking forward to a brighter future, we need to say thank you to our partners at Jerusalem Media Group and our sponsors, BeThereIsrael.com. And to everyone listening, please like, share, subscribe, and leave us a comment. We look forward to being back with more content in the future. And Ari is going to be traveling the US. If you want to hear him
Next week.
speak, reach out to him at the show notes.
And in addition, next week we have a special episode recorded already with a former Brigadier General named Donnie Van Buren, who shares a very optimistic, very positive vision of where Israel needs to go in the next year, 5 years, 10 years. So we recorded that in advance while I'll be away. And as always, Am Yisrael Chai.